Thanks, John. Hi, my name is Muhammed Syed, and the topic of my presentation is to identify mass timber research priorities of the end users, barriers to adoption, and engineering, procurement, and construction challenges in Canada. And over the summer, I worked at the Mass Timber Institute under the supervision of Dr. Koven. The internship was a great fit, especially due to my engineering background. Having the access to AN was an incredible opportunity for me, and I still work part-time at the Institute. And this is how I was introduced to mass timber and its remarkable benefits. So I will first explain the problem and study objectives and move on to the results, the methods results, and some recommendations. Apart from finding the missing pieces in the literature, I had the privilege of attending several workshops and seminars organized by the Mass Timber Institute, where I was introduced to the new ideas and received first-hand feedback on my capstone research from the mass timber industry leaders. One critical issue I hear frequently during those interactions with the experts is that despite the high level activity and interest in mass timber sector, there is still a disconnect between those producing the research and those in need of knowledge produced by that research. Another issue is the focus of published research. Abundant information has been generated about the structural performances and mechanical properties of mass timber products. However, construction, engineering, and procurement challenges and barriers to adoption have received little consideration. Finally, as the mass timber industry is maturing in North America, there is still some level of fragmentation and disorganization in the existing knowledge sharing. At the Mass Timber Institute, we struggle to find an interactive map that shows all known mass timber projects across North America, along with the project attributes such as location, when it was completed, what's the status, and website links, etc. So in this context, the goal of my study was to first identify the mass timber research priorities of the end users and those in need of mass timber knowledge in Canada. And by end users, I mean architects, designers, construction professionals, mass timber manufacturers and suppliers, forest industry, First Nation groups, academics and researchers, and government agencies. The second objective was to identify major barriers that may be hindering widespread adoption of mass timber in Canada. The third objective was to identify the engineering, procurement, and construction challenges for the use of mass timber. And the final objective was to map mass timber completed or proposed or in progress projects across North America. Right, moving on to the background here, I'll just quickly talk about two questions, try to answer. What is mass timber and why mass timber? Canada has a rich history in mass timber construction, and mass timber in the old days bring to mind the classic 19th century old building in Toronto with load-bearing bricks wall, timber columns and walls, and hardwood floor, still going strong after more than a century. So here in this picture, you can see a good such example of a historic and present-day photo of Toronto Carpet Factory located in the Liberty Village. Today, there's an excitement about designing and building tall structures with new type of wood products such as cross-laminated timber or glue lam or nail-laminated timber. But what is exactly mass timber? It is a technological advancement that uses engineered wood product for load-bearing structures fabricated by binding together large panels and beams under pressure using adhesives. Here's a graphic image produced by Sidewalk Labs explaining the mass timber supply chain processes. The process, of course, starts from the forest floor and, of course, with the sustainably harvested timber. The harvested timber would then make its way to the local sawmill, where it would be turned into a CLT or glue lam pieces. These pieces would then be turned into assembly-ready wall panels floor and beams using computer numerical machine or CNC. Mass timber panels would then be fitted with connectors and plates and finally shipped to the construction site for the final erection of the building. You get the idea that mass timber begins with the forest industry and ends with the construction industry. And let me show you some exciting visuals of the future and existing mass timber projects. So this is the interior of Galleria Italia at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto. Here is a University of British Columbia's Tallwood Tower, also called Brox-Common. Here is McEwan Schools of Architecture at Laurentian University in Sudbury. And this is a proposed location of our beautiful Tallwood Academic Tower to be built on top of the Gold Ring Center at Bloor Street and Devonshire Place. And here is another beautiful picture of the U of T Academic Tower. Another mass timber building called the Arbor to be built at George Brown College Waterfront Campus. And this is the Sidewalk Labs proposed key site project to be constructed entirely with mass timber, and this will be the largest mass timber development globally. And here is another iconic mass timber project, an elevated tree walk in Squamish in British Columbia. You get the idea. Right, so why mass timber is the direction of the future for Canada? There are three compelling reasons: climate change, affordable housing, and regional disparity. And this is a United Nations statistics about the impact of greenhouse gases. And you can see here that 40% of the greenhouse gases are related to building and construction industry, which is way higher than the transportation sector emissions. But that's the conversation we mostly hear about. So construction with wood, specifically mass timber, can offer a sustainable alternative while providing climate change mitigation solutions. The next one is urbanization. Today, half of us live in the urban cities, and that number is going to grow to almost 70%. In the next 30 years, almost 2 billion people will need a new home. That's more than 25% of the current world population. And it's no secret that the GTA has a major housing deficit and, of course, affordability problems. The scale of the challenge is enormous, and we need to explore more affordable housing and a sustainable lifestyle. Regional disparity. It is not difficult to identify economic differences that exist among the various regions in Canada. In fact, the regional disparity in Canada is among the widest in the developed world. And you can see here two great quotes from Dr. Ann Koven and Derek Nyber, who is the President and CEO of Forest Products Association of Canada. And the idea is that wood grows in the rural and northern communities, but used in the big cities like Toronto. The growing mass timber industry will help build the new mills, so the money flows into those smaller communities. A good example is Element 5, recent new mass timber factory to be built in a smaller community like St. Thomas. Right, moving on to the methods. Here you will notice that I've compiled the methods into three different sections: input, tools and techniques, and output. I'll start from the right-hand side, my survey. So I use the literature review, the personal interactions, and feedback from the industry leader as an input to develop my questionnaire survey. And I also got the ethics books. This research is being approved by the research ethics boards, and I've gone through the painfully slow process of RAB application. Justin is here, he knows. Next, I did the pre-testing before administering the live survey using the Google form, and the survey was conducted for 2 months. The response were recorded, normalized, and finally analyzed. I was given a task to get responses from at least 15 participants. but I got responses from 28. So I'm pretty happy about that. And the response rate was more than 40%. If you look at the data, the methods on the left-hand side for my GIS part, the data acquisition was done through various online resources. And because of the time constraint, I was only able to collect 60 mass timber projects in North America, and there are many more, of course. The data was then geocoded through ArcGIS desktop and converted into two shapefiles. Each represent completed or and proposed or in-progress mass timber projects. And this was done through queries and selection tools. Finally, I did the clustering to make a better visualization of my data. And the output, of course, was a 2D map and a 3D map using ArcScene, which is a web application for 3D visualization. Right, moving to the most exciting part, the results. So the response to the survey came from mass timber manufacturers, suppliers, architect, designers, engineers, construction professionals, academics, researchers, government agencies, forestry professionals, and First Nation groups. And you can notice here there is a good diversity of respondents, which I think is a good sign. Moving on to the research priority, that was my first question. And here the dark color, the darkish grayish color represent the high priority categories. And for the ease of visualization, I also highlighted attributes that have received scoring of 50% or more in the high priority category. So the top two research priorities for the end users are total project cost comparison with concrete and steel. And the second one was wood supply for mass timber manufacturers. And by that I mean actually analyzing inadequate or poor quality wood supply in Canada. We are still in the research priorities here. And you notice here that hybrid system considered as a high priority for future research. By hybrid system, I mean construction with a combination of wood, steel, and concrete. Major barriers. So the top 5 largest barriers are higher cost of mass timber products compared to steel and concrete, the product availability or lack of local production as expected, the poor standardization of codes and regulations, and resistance to change from concrete and steel. And the final large barrier was misconception about mass timber with respect to fire and building longevity. Okay, moving on to the engineering challenges, and there are top 3 engineering challenges that were selected in the higher priority zone. First being the building code compliance and regulations. The second one was the site-specific amendments to the building code. And the last one was the design permits and approvals. The procurement challenges. The top 3 were procurement model used by the client, number of manufacturers and suppliers, and supply and demand gaps of mass timber products in Canada. Construction challenges. A staggering 71% respondent consider inadequate specialized subcontractor as very challenging. So this is a good time to invest in mass timber contracting business. Inadequate skilled workforce is another challenge. Right, the last one was the wood protection during construction. And these are the questions I ask. And excessive moisture exposure during construction is considered as very challenging. Right, I'm gonna take you through the GIS part where I included 60 mass timber projects and their locations and divide them into completed or proposed in progress projects. And I used the ArcScene. I hope it works. It worked. Okay. Right. So you can see the bluish circles here are the mass timber projects in North America that are already completed. and the grayish circles are the one that are in progress or proposed. This is another visualization of the same data set with a 2D map. And you can see the proportion in bigger cities like Toronto, Montreal, Quebec, Vancouver, that has major activity of mass timber. So, and this is an interactive map, of course. What I did, I also collected certain data set. If you want to see Toronto and want to see specific information, for example, this project here, I hope it works. So this is, you can see like different information. This is the Billfish Forest Stewardship and Education. We have been there in North York. And you can see the address, when it was completed, what's the status, and a website link which takes you directly to the website and you can find more information. Right. So some recommendation in for future research. I think in the future there should be a bigger sample size. I'm pretty happy about with my sample size within the time constraints. And of course more regional representation like provinces, Atlantic provinces or Alberta. I didn't have any responses from these provinces. We could have an advanced statistical analysis in the future, and we could ask questions like how different professions responded differently. Another future research project, it's very exciting I guess, is to have a map that shows the linear movement, the shipping routes. So we can ask questions like where does the wood comes from? And we can also have a detailed GIS mapping of mass timber projects that might include what kind of products they have used, CLT, glulam, or what kind of tree species they have used, and so on. Right, some limitations. As I said earlier, I had a smaller sample size, I guess, due to time constraints. And this survey was done online, so it may lack the richness of responses in the data set. And there's some less representation from some end users like forest industry, First Nation, and others. And I put a question mark after others because there might be some end users which I really don't know to recruit in my survey, probably insurance guys or investors. The final limitation was that the database for the GIS mapping was limited. One final thought. The professor at Oregon State University, and she said, we must ensure that mass timber drives sustainable forest management, otherwise all of these benefits are lost. Right, I would like to acknowledge all these people, but specifically my external supervisor. I just want to introduce you to Mark Gaglione, who is here. Mark is a building and material science specialist from EllisDon, and he was involved with me from the beginning and helped me out in my questionnaire survey. Thank you, and I open the floor for questions.
Oh, got a question over.
So, as I understand, one of the big sort of issues with mass timber is the sound problem, right? The acoustic properties of mass timber. Do you think that sort of this hybrid panel approach is gonna solve that problem, or or is there anything else that we can look at?
I think I think I do. Like one thing I need to clear that I'm not advocating to just build structures out of wood. There should be a combination of concrete, steel, and wood, and that would solve the acoustic problem, of course. Yeah.
So just looking at the map you had of all the different projects, I was curious, since moisture was listed as one of the great concerns in the survey, like a lot of the projects seem to be concentrated in fairly wet areas. So like how come in like the American Southwest and West there's not as many projects?
So the map I showed you, that was just for the project locations, the proportion of mass timber projects across North America. That wasn't showing this data, which is here. So if you look at the excessive moisture exposure here, it was scored as very challenging. 54% of the respondents said, yeah, it's a big challenge when it comes to deal with the excessive moisture exposure during construction. Yeah, that was not related to the GIS map.
Right.
Yeah.
But in general, like you're not seeing as many projects in like dry areas of North America, like the American Southwest. So I was just wondering, maybe separate from the moisture question even, like.
If you look at the map, you notice here a lot of projects are in the West Coast, which is a wet region. So I think it's not a problem. That's what it shows actually, the moisture control. It's not a problem. Otherwise, we could have more concentration of mass timber projects in the dry areas, let's say.
Question back here, Taha. So in Europe, they've expanded that industry a lot more than we have in North America. And I'm just wondering if you have an explanation. I mean, I'm sure they had the same sort of obstacles and roadblocks. We have the same or more timber supply than they do. So, what can we learn from them, or what are we not doing to promote it enough, I guess? How do we address the shortcomings using what the Europeans maybe have done?
I think I do agree. We have to learn a lot from Europeans, and actually we are doing that. We are procuring a lot of CLT and glue lamp pieces from outside Canada, primarily from Austria. But back to your question, I think in Canada, and based on the responses from the end users, and I didn't show you my qualitative data. I have tons of qualitative data with me, which I will include in the Capstone report. And one thing I found consistently from the respondents, that there is a resistance to change in Canada. So the investors are they don't want to invest until there are more demonstration projects being completed in Canada. This is one issue. The other issue is the building codes and compliance. So currently, you can go up to 6 stories. You won't go further than that. And we have, of course, specific cases in British Columbia, like the Brock's Common, that was 18-story, and we have our own U of T academic tower that's almost 14-story. So, but there's no standardization of the building code. It's another issue. And of course, the supply and demand, the local production is a big problem. Yeah, and being, as I said, Element 5 plant that will be operational next year is a good example. So we are getting there. It's a bit slow, though.
This may be outside your area of expertise, but I'm just curious. Do you know, have there been life cycle analyses of this kind of wood product compared to I'm not talking about steel and cement, compared to status quo wood products? So, for example, shorter lifespans of many wood products compared to these, obviously, but also higher manufacturing emissions during, whatever glues, plastics, the processing, et cetera. So I'm wondering, have you seen life cycle? Like, what are the relative costs, or what's the relative life cycle analysis of these types of things?
Yeah, I mean, based on my current information, I think it's a debatable issue. What I've seen in the literature, that cement alone is responsible for 8% CO2 emission globally. And it's a lot, 8%. Of course, I'm not saying just to use mass timber to construct your building. We need to have a mix of cement, steel, and concrete. That's one issue. And again, climate change, of course, when you construct with wood, you always, because wood and mass timber specifically have a environmental bonus to embody carbon dioxide.
Right, that's what I'm
Yeah.
asking. Has anybody done full life cycle analysis that you're aware of?
I think there have been some reports. I'm not totally aware, but I think there are some reports being done. But I feel like there is a need to keep updating this information. You know what I mean? Some people, of course, think that if you cut down the tree, then there are conservation issues, caribou habitat, for example. On the other side, some people argue, 8% CO2 emission comes alone from the cement industry. Yeah, so I think we need to have a balance of both sides. That's what I think.
Great job. I just wanted to ask a quick question, a bunch of questions, but I'll only ask one for now. Did you look at all, when you talked about the barriers to entering this market, did you look at all at sector-specific barriers? People who want to build a university might have different constraints than people who want to build a condo, and what kind of limitations each of those would face respectively?
So the survey was done, was sent to the general end users. So I did not analyze the data specifically with different industry. And as I said in my future recommendations, we could have an advanced statistical analysis using the same data set to see how different professions responded differently. For example, like higher cost of mass timber products than concrete and steel is 61%, but if I compare this data with the responses from architects and engineers, it might show a totally different trend, right? And also a misconception about mass timber regarding concern over fire and building longevity and another issue. So generally, there is an issue, but I think it's also very specific to the professions you're asking. Yeah.
I like your reference to mass timber changing attitudes in St. Thomas. Like, I've been to St. Thomas, Ontario, and it's a terribly deforested area. But it made me think that as a component of long-term planning to encourage mass timber, that it could be part of a afforestation strategy of, parts of Ontario, of Canada that are, devoid of trees.
Certainly, I guess we could have afforestation programs when it comes to mass timber, but I feel like Canada have the largest forest resources that are being harvested sustainably. So, and then there is an issue of forest fire, invasive species, like the example in British Columbia, thousands of hectares have been infested. So the point I'm making here is that let's make good use of that wood and turn into mass timber, for example.
Okay, thank you, Taha.